Hello everyone and welcome to the third part of Allplan Basis course for students. My name is Jacob Martin and today I will talk a little bit further about architectural elements and how to model them. Let's get right to it. So again, we have our recent projects and we double click on our project Allplan Basis Course 1. So the last time we were basically modeling some foundations. So we have block foundations and strip foundations. And the important thing about it is that we were basically putting them on different drawings. You don't have to do that. You could put them in the same drawing. But I wanted to demonstrate how to use the different drawing settings: current, edit, reference, and not selected. And we will keep it that way. So the next thing I want to show you is how to basically model the columns. So what we are going to do is we are basically setting the foundation and the grid to the setting reference. So let's scroll down to drawing number 31, and there we are with the columns. We close that one, and now we can see that we basically have our axis grid and our foundations grayish in the background. So let's continue, and I will expand the components menu that we see up here. So for those of you that are not in the right menu, please click on the action bar on the role selection and select Architecture, Label, Elements. Let's do a double click on components as well. And here we can see that there is the setting for column. There are also subsettings. So for example, we have columns and flush piece, but for what we are going to do, we need the columns. So click on column. And it's the same again as we had in the block foundations and the strip foundations. So let's maybe talk about the different types of architectural elements. So basically we have something, for example, like walls, we have columns, and we have block foundations, and we have strip foundations. So the thing is, when you are creating these kinds of elements, this one is a single element. This is basically the same as a block foundation. You define all the sizes and parameters for this kind of element, and then you basically place it there. And this is the reason why you have the anchor point for preview menu. There are also elements that are bounded to lines, and the elements that are bounded to lines are strip foundations and walls. We will also talk about today about the slab foundation and the slab itself. So please keep in mind for the column and block foundation and similar elements, we can click on properties, and we have to define all the parameters that are related to the column. So this is not very different from the block foundation. We have the outline that is defined. So we, for example, have like this rectangular outline, and with the parameters, we can set the width and the thickness. So we go ahead and we select a width of 0.3. We can see in the preview that this is already changing. And just a side note from my side, if you want to zoom in the preview window up here, you can basically press and hold down the right mouse button. This is important, so please keep that one in mind if you want to zoom, because the scroll wheel doesn't work in this kind of menu. Let's change the view type from the preview to animation. And let's go ahead. We also have the chamfer and the fillet. So you can use this, for example, the chamfer 0.4. I'm sorry, I wanted to add 0.04. And there you can see the chamfer. So this is basically also a good thing if you want to model like precast elements. You could use, if you want, some settings like that, or if you want round edges, you can also set it. We don't need it for this kind of element right now, so we want basically in situ concrete. we can also define an angle, which we don't need, and there is the relative height. So again, we could just set the height in this kind of menu, but we don't really know what the relative height is set to if we just adjust the value up here. So let's click on the height menu, and it's the absolute exact same menu we were experiencing beforehand. So let's take a look at the settings. We have, for example, relative to upper plane. The offset could be set to 0. Why? Because the plane that we have defined, and we see here on the right hand side, is 480. And this is perfectly fine because 480 is the height that we already want. So the next thing I want to talk about today is the absolute value. So if you click on absolute value, we can see the preview menu that is changing drastically. What basically happens if you input an absolute value with an elevation point, there is no boundary to the already existing planes. So when I input the value, for example, 4.5, it will always have this kind of height. Still, it is possible that, for example, the bottom level is still bounded to the lower plane. So this is possible. So the top level and the bottom level are completely independent one from each other. And there are certain types of scenarios where this is really handy and as well needed. So please keep that in mind as well. There is also something called like match bottom level of component, match top level of component. So we can basically have this kind of menu and we can basically take the height of already existing elements, or we could use the fixed component height. And there you can see it. So I can't set the bottom level and the top level to the fixed component height. That doesn't work. But I can set, for example, the top level as fixed component height. And after that, I can set the bottom level, for example, to relative to lower plane, upper plane, or absolute value. So this is still possible. And there I have to input the component height, for example, just like that. And there it works. But as I told you beforehand, we don't really need this. We basically are able to use 95% of the time the relative to upper plane for the top level and for the bottom level relative to lower plane. So we have the offset, we set it to 0, and for the bottom level as well. So relative to lower plane, 0. Press OK. Change the view. And now the height is 5.05. Which we also had beforehand, but still we have to check the relative height and basically get into it. And we always have the setting display surface element in plan view. So beforehand, regarding the block foundations and the strip foundations, we were basically unchecking this box. So for elements like columns and walls, I would suggest that you keep this kind of function activated. There is also the hatching and pattern, and still we want to change the surface area. I'm taking the same surface area. I'm going to take a different one now. 30 rotation materials, exposed concrete. I'm taking that one for the columns. And we also need a setting for the style area, which is also really important. So I will just check this box here, and we can see that the surface elements are shown in this small window. So let's go ahead, press OK. Oh, and I said that I forgot to setting, so the thickness should be also set to 0.3. And now we can go ahead and basically use our anchor point. Just like that. And copy these kinds of elements. And there we have it. So this is basically how we input the columns. Okay, so let's go ahead and maybe talk a little bit about elements that we didn't have before. So I will save that one. Again, change my drawing to the base plate. And this was absolutely necessary that we first did the columns because we need the shape of the columns to define the base plate. So we will have to talk about a little bit more about this. So the first thing I want to showcase to you is the difference between two functions, because at the first glance, this is maybe very mistaken. So we have, for example, the slab foundation and we have the slab itself. And I want to showcase something to you. So for example, let's use the slab foundation and I will just draw a shape here, just like that. And I will draw a slab there as well, roughly the same size. It's not important that it's exactly the same size. So the first thing that we notice that there is not much difference. So we can also take a look at the menus, at the properties. So this is the slab foundation, it looks like that. So keep that in mind for a second. And this is the slab, it looks like that. So it doesn't really look different. So why are there two separate functions for these kinds of elements? Why don't we have a slab for everything? Why do we have a slab foundation specifically? And the first thing that you see, the difference is when you hover over this kind of element. So there we can see in the info box that there is the tag slab foundation there. And the layer is basically the German term Flachgründung, which also means slab foundation. And there we have the slab. And the slab is also set to Flachgründung, which is not right, to be honest. We should change that as well. So we should maybe change the layer. I was a little bit quick there, so you just have to mark this kind of slab, go to properties and change the layer. And let's take a look. There should be Decke, Stahlbeton, or we could just use Decke. So which basically is the German term for slab. The next thing that changed drastically is when we do a right click on this kind of slab foundation and go on modify attributes. We talked about that in the first video. So we basically have different presets regarding that. So the IFC entity is set to IFC footing and the attribute set object is set to foundation. Let's do the same with the slab. Right click, modify attributes. And there we can see we have the IFC entity IFC slab and the attribute set object is set to slab. And of course, we could change that. So we could go ahead and change that. So this is not really an issue. The thing here is, if I would draw a slab foundation and after that some slabs, I would have to change all these parameters. And this is the reason why there are two different options to basically create these kinds of elements. Okay, so please keep that one in mind, that there are presets and the presets are dependent on the function you're choosing. So slab foundation and slab. And there's also even more I want to showcase to you. So since we haven't talked about these kinds of options, we also have, for example, options like hatching. So I just wanted to show that very quickly. 2D areas. The input of our slab foundation that we need to run is not very different from the input of these kinds of 2D areas. And we also already talked about the area detection. So I will keep this activated for a second and just click on here. And we can see that this does these kinds of things. So this is not really what we want. And you have to keep an eye out to the area detection if you're basically inputting these kinds of elements. The next thing I want to show you, area detection is still activated because now I'm not clicking in a closed space. You can basically input very easily from the top left to the bottom right a rectangle. So just like that. First click, second click, and after that what happens, Allplan chooses the direct connection from the first and the second click. But when I click now on escape, the rectangular we have seen beforehand reappears. And this is a really good thing. We are also able to draw any kind of shape that we want if we just click. So maybe just like that. And as soon as we go ahead and press escape, the last input point and the first input point will be connected in a straight line. And I will demonstrate it now. Keep an eye out. I'm pressing escape now. And there is our shape. And there is the direct connection from the first and the last input point. Okay, so keep that one in mind. So I will delete these kinds of slab foundations, and I have to show you a little bit more regarding that. So we've learned that we should use slab foundation. Very good. We will deactivate the area detection. And we have the properties. Of course, we have always to look at the properties before we input any kinds of elements. Okay, so we go to the height. Bottom level ground floor, top level, bottom level relative to lower plane, top level foundation, 0 minus 0.25 looks good. Okay, display surface element in plan view. We don't want that, we don't need that, which is perfectly fine. So we the box, we keep that one unchecked. Then we press OK. And now we go ahead and I want to show you something. So the first thing we could do is drawing the slab foundation in that way. Why? Because we want the columns to be cut out from this kind of plate. Just like that. Oh, there's a misclick. So I will just press that button. Just like that. And this takes some time, which is fine. But there is another issue that we are creating. So give me a second to demonstrate that to you. Okay, just like that. So there you see the slab foundation. And it's looking pretty good. All right. So there is another option. So I will just use this kind of slab foundation and put it above. Let's create another slab foundation more easily. But I won't stop there because I basically generated slab foundation from the top left to the bottom right. And there we have basically, yeah, a collision, and we don't want collisions in our building. So we go ahead, and I will demonstrate it later as well. We basically click on recess, opening and slab. Click on the slab. Just make a quick check. Perfect, fine. 1, 2, 3, 4. Choose the slab openings. Put them there. And copy them. So I don't know if this is really quicker. I think it's roughly the same time that we need to create this kind of slab. But there is a difference. So we have these two kinds of slab foundations. And if we just hover over them, they seem perfectly the same. Even if I mark them, we don't really see a difference. The thing that is different is slab opening. So we basically created an element. And then we added, I would call them negative elements into that kind of slab. We don't have these kinds of negative elements down here. So you could say, okay, they look the same. They have, regarding the collision check, the same result. So why should I even care? And I will show you. So for example, we have these kinds of reports that we can create. And these kinds of reports are basically used for a lot of stuff. So basically, let's go ahead and say reports, VCM. Let's take quantities and now take the first slab. And the thing that basically happens is we can see what Allplan is trying to do. So we have like this one plate that is separated into very small and a lot of pieces. And sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. Still, the value in the end is right. So this is fine. This is fine. But there is a big issue that has been generated. Nobody in practice would basically divide this kind of plate just like that. So this doesn't make sense in that term. So let's go ahead, again, Mengengrafik, and take the upper one. And there we see the right result. So we basically have our wall plate, and then we have our slab opening, more than once, of course, and these are minus 0.092 square meters. And this is basically what we want. So in practice, this is a lot better than what we have seen beforehand. And we basically are telling the program, okay, there you have a slab, there you have a lot of slab openings, just use it that way. So this is also the information I wanted to give you. So let's go ahead, delete these two, and go again through the process of drawing. I'm sorry, I still need the columns of drawing this kind of slab foundation. So click on slab foundation, click on properties. We already checked the height, so we go from the top left to the bottom right, just like that. And when we're satisfied, we can press escape once. Then we press escape twice. And please go now to the function recess, opening and slab. So select this kind of slab foundation. Again, go to properties. And there we have the outline parameters, width and length. We can set that one to 0.30, 0.30. We could also create a recess, but for this kind of function and situation we want to work with, we basically don't need a recess, we need an opening. So opening, okay. Make sure that the anchor point for preview is set to the middle. And now we can set them exactly, and I'm not using the copy function right now, exactly in the middle of our columns. And this is what we want, all right? So you've learned that when you use the slab foundations, that there is also the function recess, opening and slab, and you should use that one. Okay, so let's go ahead, save this kind of drawing, open on a project-specific basis, and now let's go to walls. Close, double-click on your mouse wheel to basically centralize the view again. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's create our wall. A wall is a kind of complicated thing. So we have more sub-functions. We have, for example, wall, we have freeform wall, and we have a profile wall. So let's go to wall. There we have the properties. And make sure if your menu looks different from what you're seeing here, you can use this label. So not parameters attributes, use the label total, just like that. So the thickness of the wall can be set in this menu point, so 0.25. And again, the relative height should be set via this menu. And again, since we basically developed a nice plan view with the top level ground floor set to 430 and a bottom level ground floor set to 0, we are good to go. So make sure that the relative to upper plane is set to top level and the bottom level is set to our relative to lower plane. 0, 0, okay. Good. So let's go ahead add a surface. You already know what it's all about. And there we have the style area. And we check the style area again, 301 Beton bewährt. So press OK. And now you see the properties menu on the left side. And we can see that this is basically our way to choose what we had beforehand as an anchor point. But we can basically change this kind of direction for the input of the wall. So let's keep it for a second this way. So if I would have it this way, set from the offset set to 0 and 0.25, I could click on that one and I could see, okay, this is not right. This is not on the right side. So I could use this kind of button to reverse it, and I can set the offset direction in the opposite side. But still, this implies some issues because I want my walls in this kind of situation to be exactly on my grid. So I press escape once and just set this kind of offset right to the middle, 0.125, 0.125. So let's go ahead. First click, second click, and you already know that one from the strip foundation. Click, click. Click, click. I misclicked and I will change it later. Just like that. So, and there's a misclick I did on purpose because I wanted to show you that there are different options to basically work with walls that we don't have with like 3D elements. So, for example, we have join linear components. You can see exactly in the small GIF that is played here what that's all about. And we have join linear component with a line. So this is basically the same we have seen beforehand, but this time not with another element, but just with a line. And we can use that one to basically click on that kind of function, click on the wall, and after that, click on this line. And this will be set automatically and perfectly fine. And again, copy and mirror function. This is the reason why I showed you in the first video. So there we have it. This is basically our first building that we have created. We have block foundations, we have strip foundations, we have a base plate, we have a lot of columns and a lot of walls. But now we want to add a little bit more. So what we are going to add now is basically an opening in the wall. And for that, we use door. So maybe this will be bigger than your usual door, but that doesn't really matter because I showed you beforehand on the slab that you can basically input recess and openings, and this is basically the same thing. So you're basically adding openings into a wall. So we have a door and we have, for example, window, corner window, opening designer, stuff like that. And we also have functions like recess, niche, slit, opening, and stuff like that. So there are tons of options for you to create openings in walls, but we're going to stick with the door, and that has some kind of meaning, and I will show you in a second. So what we're doing is basically, again, we click on properties. We have our door, so we are choosing the shape, and you can see it's always the same. It's always the same. So we use the shape, then we have the width of the opening, which can be set to 2 meters, and the opening height, which can be set to 2.76 meters. This is also fine. Let's check the relative height really quickly. So for this kind of component, this basically takes place that we could also choose fixed component height, for example, the 2.76. And we also have the bottom level ground floor, which is set offset to 0. So press OK. And now it gets interesting because now we are working first with a library element. So there's already a library element, and I want to show you how to use this kind of library element. So basically, click on this kind of button that you see in the library element function down here. And what's basically happening is that our library gets opened. And we have, for example, I will go back that we can see everything. So we have our library here. Then we go to default. Then we go to architecture. Then we have garage doors, because this is what we want. And we could choose, for example, sectional doors or lifting doors. So I will stick with the lifting doors on that one. And there is, for example, the 10-part Alu Smooth. So just do a double click on that one. And the good thing about this is a SmartPart. That basically means if you are choosing a SmartPart, it will fit perfectly in your opening. And you can edit the SmartParts in a lot of ways. So there is the sill representation we can set to none. And there is the reveal. So we can also uncheck the box of the reveal with create reveal element. We basically don't need that. We can also design the reveal. We're not going to do that right now, but I just want to show you the option how to access it. Okay, so let's click on OK. And now is the part where it gets interesting. So please, before you place anything inside a wall, check your anchor point. And this time the anchor point can be only set on the bottom line of this kind of object, which is a good thing. So let's set the anchor point for preview right to the middle. And now there are different options to input this kind of opening. So you can see down here in the front or south elevation already how I want to place that kind of door. So the first option is, because I want it right in the middle, I could go very close to that kind of wall, go a little bit to the right, and boom, there is my point. And you can see the symbol that it has changed right left to my cursor, that this is basically the midpoint of our wall. So I could go ahead and do a left click now, and the opening would be perfectly fine. But still, we go ahead and we do a right click on that one, go to midpoint, and do the same thing on the opposite side, just like that. Click. And there we have the ask from Allplan for a new reference point or offset point that we can enter. So this is set to 2.55, and this is fine because this is the length right now from this yellow little arrowhead that we are facing here to this kind of midpoint. We press enter, and now Allplan asks us for the length of this kind of opening, 2 meters. Enter again. And now we can see that the SmartPart is already in there. So this is basically what we want. We can see the SmartPart that is in there, and it already has exactly 2 meters. So this is also perfectly fine. All right. So let's press escape a couple of times and take a very quick look at the door SmartPart. So just go ahead and choose with your cursor, and this is important, the door SmartPart, not the door opening, because if you do a double click on the door opening, it will open the door opening menu that we had beforehand. We click on door SmartPart, double click. And now you can see on the left side that the properties for lifting door are endless. We have a ton of properties that we could edit. So we have, for example, like values for open by percentage. And I could say, okay, I want this one to be opened like 40%. Just like that. Close. And there it is. So the options for designing this thing are endless. And I don't want to get too much into detail here because this would be a very own story to only talk about SmartParts and how to modify them. But I want to also show you that there are things like 2D representation. So we can basically see the level of detail for our 2D plans that if we want them to be created, how they should look like. And we also have a 3D representation, and we can basically choose different colors, different surfaces, and of course the settings, which for this kind of SmartPart only has like the bottom setting. All right, so let's press escape once and take a very quick look at our central perspective again. So this is what we created. I think you can be proud if you followed to this step. And this is the very first thing that we've showcased. So I hope you really liked that part. It was a little bit different from the parts beforehand because we talked a little bit more open and more freely about these kinds of architectural components. But I hope you still enjoyed it, and see you in the next part. Bye bye.